The candlelight flickered across her face as she laughed. Light, effortless, cruel. My son didn't notice. He was too busy trying to make everyone feel comfortable. But I saw it. The glint in her eyes, the secret exchange with her friend, the whispered words meant to humiliate me. They thought I couldn't understand, but I did. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from. Because one day, you might find out what people really think of you when they believe you're not listening. I didn't break. I smiled, lifted my glass, and let the silence hold my pride together. That night, I learned that some of the deepest betrayals arrive dressed as charm. I had no idea then what it would cost me. It happened over dinner. A simple evening, white plates, the soft glow of candles, a table that smelled faintly of rosemary and garlic. I had spent the afternoon cooking, humming to myself, happy that my son was home. I wanted everything to feel warm, welcoming. Instead, it became the moment I learned what cruelty sounds like when it's disguised as laughter. At first, I didn't even realize what was happening. There was a comment, light and teasing, said in another language, a language she didn't think I understood. Her voice was sweet, practiced, but her eyes were sharp. Everyone smiled. My son laughed, unaware. And in that moment, something inside me froze. I knew exactly what those words meant. They were about me, my clothes, my voice, the way I tried too hard to make her feel comfortable. I remember sitting there, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. I lifted my glass of water, forced a polite smile, and listened as the room filled with small talk. On the outside, I was composed, the calm, polite mother everyone expected. But inside, my heart felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone there. It wasn't just the insult. It was the realization that the woman my son loved had no kindness in her eyes when she looked at me. Every second after that stretched on forever. The scrape of a fork, the sound of someone clearing their throat, the laughter that suddenly felt too loud. I kept wondering, how many other times had she mocked me? How many other moments had I mistaken for warmth I wanted to leave? But I didn't. I stayed because I didn't want to ruin my son's night. That's the thing about dignity. Sometimes it feels like a cage. I swallowed my pride that night, one careful sip at a time, and told myself to breathe. But maybe I should start at the beginning. Before that dinner, my life was simple, quiet in the best kind of way. I had my routines, the kind that make a house feel alive even when it's just you inside it. Mornings with soft light through the kitchen window, the smell of coffee filling the air. Evenings where I'd water the plants, watch the neighborhood kids race their bikes down the street, and wait for my phone to buzz with a message from my son. Daniel was my everything. He always had been. After his father passed, it felt like it was just the two of us against the world. I worked hard, not because I had to prove anything, but because I wanted him to have choices I never had. He grew into such a kind man, steady, responsible, a quiet thinker, the kind of person who listened more than he spoke. Every time I saw him smile, it felt like I'd done at least one thing right in my life. So when he told me he'd met someone, I remember the way my heart lifted. He sounded different when he spoke about her, lighter, almost boyish again. Her name was Elise. He said she was warm, graceful, the kind of woman who could walk into any room and make everyone feel seen. I remember thinking, good. My son deserved someone who saw him. When I finally met her, I understood what he meant. Elise was beautiful in that effortless, polished way. The kind of beauty that doesn't ask for attention, but still receives it. She had a calm confidence that drew people in. I remember how she smiled, how she held herself. She asked thoughtful questions, complimented my cooking, even offered to help wash dishes the first time she came over. I wanted to believe she was genuine, and I did. I let myself. Maybe that's what mothers do. We see the best in the people our children love because we want so badly for their hearts to be safe. I noticed small things. Her quick glances at her phone, the way she sometimes looked at Daniel like she was measuring him. But I told myself not to be suspicious. I wanted this to work. For him. For us. So when they said they were coming over for dinner that weekend, I felt a kind of peace. I cooked Daniel's favorite, rosemary chicken, the way he liked it when he was little. I even took out the good china, the ones I only used on holidays. I remember thinking that night could be the start of something beautiful. I didn't know it then. But that evening would change everything I believed about love and trust. The night felt ordinary at first. Soft music in the background, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary drifting through the room, the glow of candles flickering across the table. Daniel was relaxed, laughing in that easy way he had when he was home. Elise sat beside him, every movement graceful, her smile polished like something practiced. On the surface, it was perfect, the kind of dinner I had imagined 100 times. But beneath it, something felt off. It was small things at first. The way Elise looked at her reflection in the back of a spoon when she thought no one noticed. The way she gently corrected Daniel mid-story. Her tone just a little too sharp to be loving. She laughed at my jokes, but her eyes didn't. I told myself I was overanalyzing, that maybe I was just nervous about wanting her to like me. Then it happened. She leaned toward Daniel and said something softly, not in English. Her voice was light, playful, but her words, I understood them. She didn't know I spoke her language. I had learned it years ago when I worked with a group of exchange students. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to understand when someone was mocking you. Her words cut deeper than I expected. Something about my clothes, my quaint manners, the way I tried too hard. It was said like a joke, a private whisper between lovers. Daniel laughed, unaware. The sound of it, his laughter, hurt more than the words. I felt the room tilt slightly, like the air had thickened. My hands trembled under the table, but I kept my face still. I reached for my glass of water, the rim cool against my fingers, and took a slow sip to steady myself. Every instinct screamed to stand up, to defend myself, but I didn't. I smiled. I listened. I played the role of the polite mother who didn't understand. Inside, though, something cracked. It wasn't just humiliation. It was a quiet, searing disappointment, not only in her, but in myself, for believing she was kind, for wanting her approval. By the time dessert was served, my resolve had hardened. I smiled when they left that night, thanked her for coming, and even hugged her goodbye. But as the door closed, I knew that something had shifted in me forever. That was the moment I decided to find out who she really was. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the echo of Elise's laughter circling through my mind like a haunting melody I couldn't turn off. I replayed the dinner over and over, the glances, the tone, the insult disguised as sweetness. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that maybe I'd misunderstood, but deep down, I knew. I had seen it in her eyes, that flicker of cruelty she didn't bother to hide. Still, the guilt ate at me. What kind of mother doubts her son's happiness? Daniel looked so content, so sure. Who was I to question that? But love has a way of sharpening your senses. You feel when something is wrong, not because you're suspicious, but because you've spent your life protecting someone. I'd done it since the day he was born. Why would I stop now? By the time the clock read 2:30 a.m., I knew what I had to do. I wouldn't confront Daniel. Not yet. I couldn't risk being wrong, or worse, alienating him. So I made myself a cup of tea, sat down at my computer, and started where most truths hide these days online. At first, it was harmless curiosity. A quick search of her name, her supposed company, her alma mater. But what I found didn't add up. The company website listed her as a marketing executive, but her profile photo there was different. Younger, darker hair, the kind of image you'd find in a stock photo library. I looked again. Same name, different face. My stomach tightened. I moved on to social media. Her stories didn't line up. Photos tagged in cities she'd never mentioned. Friends who didn't seem to know her well. There was one image of her with Daniel, smiling at a concert. In the background, I caught a reflection in a window. Her phone screen opened to another name, another profile. The more I looked, the stranger it became. Her resume online had 3 versions, each with subtle differences. One listed a university that didn't exist. Another claimed a volunteer project in a place she couldn't have been at the time. I even found a public record search that showed no Elise matching her last name living in the city she said she was from. Each discovery was a pinprick, small but sharp. Together, they formed a truth too big to ignore. Elise wasn't who she said she was. I remember sitting back, staring at the soft light from my desk lamp, feeling a mix of heartbreak and validation. I didn't want to be right. I wanted her to be good, for Daniel's sake. But I also knew that pretending would be worse. The fear came first. Fear for what she might be hiding, what she wanted. But beneath it, something stronger began to rise, resolve. If she thought she could fool everyone, she had no idea who she was dealing with. When Elise called to say her parents were coming into town and wanted to meet me, I knew immediately something was wrong. Her voice was too cheerful, too rehearsed, like someone performing a script they had memorized. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the same one I'd felt the night of the first dinner. But I smiled, told her I'd be honored to have them over. Inside, I was already making a different plan. This wasn't a family visit. This was a show. Whatever game she was playing, she was about to learn that I knew the rules better than she did. That night, after Daniel went home, I sat at the kitchen table and laid out everything I'd found. Notes, screenshots, printouts, a map of her lies spread across the wood surface. Her parents didn't exist anywhere online. The names she'd mentioned didn't match any records. Whoever was coming to dinner, they weren't who she said they were. I took a slow breath and began preparing. Not with fear this time, but with focus. I cleaned every corner of the house, polished the silverware, and set out the same china from the last dinner. Each plate felt symbolic, like a quiet rehearsal of control. I lit the same candles, but now their soft glow felt different, no longer warm, but deliberate. I wanted the night to mirror the first, but this time, I would decide how it ended. The next morning, I called a friend, someone I trusted from my old job in immigration services. I didn't explain everything, just enough to have her nearby, quietly observing from a distance. If things went wrong, at least someone would know the truth. As the day of the dinner approached, my emotions balanced on a thin line between guilt and resolve. Guilt for keeping Daniel in the dark, resolve for protecting him, even if it meant breaking his heart. I practiced my calm in front of the mirror, softened my tone, steadied my breathing. I wanted no hint of anger, only composure. I also rehearsed the one advantage I had kept hidden: my understanding of Elise's language. The same secret that had hurt me would now become my weapon. When the evening finally arrived, everything was perfect. The table gleamed, the food smelled comforting, and the candles flickered with quiet patience. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, and the steady beat of my heart. The table was set, the candles were lit, and I knew by the end of the night, nothing would ever be the same. The evening began with laughter. That kind of brittle, practiced laughter people use when they're pretending to belong somewhere. Elise arrived with her parents, a neatly dressed couple who smiled too much and said too little. Their politeness was exaggerated, their gestures too synchronized, as if they'd been coached on how to appear natural. Daniel, bless him, looked radiant, proud to have us all in the same room. I watched him, and it broke my heart. He had no idea the world he believed in was about to collapse. The air was thick with perfume and pretense. As we sat down, I noticed small inconsistencies. The way Elise's mother hesitated before answering a question about where they lived. How the father avoided eye contact when Daniel mentioned their supposed hometown. I smiled gently, offering refills of wine, small talk, and laughter. Beneath my calm, I could feel my pulse counting down. When the main course was served, I set my fork down and looked at the three of them. It was time. I slipped into their language, the same one Elise had once used to insult me. My voice was steady, my tone polite, even kind. I asked them something simple, something that any native speaker would understand instantly. The effect was immediate. Their faces froze. Elise's hand twitched, her fork clinking against her plate. The color drained from her face as the so-called parents exchanged a look, one that said everything: panic, recognition, exposure. I continued speaking, slow and deliberate, never raising my voice. Inside, I felt the storm I'd carried for weeks quiet into something sharper, precision. Each word landed like a measured strike, revealing layer after layer of deceit. The father answered clumsily, his accent faltering. The mother tried to recover, but her words tangled. Elise's eyes darted between them. Then to me, as she realized exactly what I was doing. Daniel looked confused at first, trying to follow, trying to make sense of it all. I could feel his gaze burning into me, begging for an explanation. I didn't look away. I kept my focus on Elise, the woman who had laughed at me in this very house, thinking I wouldn't understand. Finally, I switched back to English. I told them, calmly, clearly, that I knew who they weren't, that their names didn't exist in any public record, that the stories they had told were stitched together from other people's lives. I listed the details: the false company, the mismatched university dates, the doctored photos. With each revelation, the room grew heavier, quieter, smaller. The parents stood abruptly, muttering excuses in broken English. Elise stayed seated for a moment, her breathing shallow, her eyes glossy. Then, in a sudden, graceless motion, she rose too. I watched her shoulders tremble as she realized there was no way out. Daniel tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The sound that escaped him wasn't anger, it was disbelief, the sound of something breaking. And then, they were gone. The front door closed with a dull, hollow thud that echoed through the house. For a long moment, I sat alone at that table. The candles flickered weakly, wax pooling at their bases. The food had gone cold. I could still smell the faint sweetness of the dessert no one touched. My son stood by the doorway, silent, his world unraveling in front of him. It wasn't victory I felt that night. It was loss, deep, aching loss. Because in exposing her lies, I'd also shattered his illusion of love. I'd protected him, yes, but I'd also wounded him. And as I sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the fading echo of footsteps down the hall, I realized that truth, once spoken, can't ever be taken back. The house was quiet after they left, the kind of silence that feels almost alive, pressing against the walls and filling every corner. I remember sitting there long after the candles burned down, the smell of wax and wilted flowers hanging in the air. Daniel's chair was still pulled back from the table. His napkin lay folded where he had left it. Everything looked so ordinary, and yet everything had changed. For days, we barely spoke. He moved through the house like a ghost, polite but distant. I didn't push him. I knew what heartbreak looked like. Not just romantic heartbreak, but the kind that comes when you realize someone you trusted was never who they claimed to be. He wasn't angry with me, not really. He was angry at the truth, at how final it felt. I carried my own guilt quietly. Every night, I questioned myself, whether I could have handled it differently, whether protecting him had cost him something irreplaceable. I'd saved him from a life built on lies, but in doing so, I'd broken his illusion of love. That's a wound no mother wants to inflict. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted. The house began to sound normal again. Footsteps, the clink of coffee cups, the sound of the television in the background. One morning, I found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window. He didn't say much, but he smiled. Not the wide, carefree one he used to have, but something smaller, softer, like forgiveness taking shape. I think that was the moment we both began to heal. Sometimes, I still think about Elise, not with hatred, but with a kind of sad understanding. I'll never know what drove her to lie, fear, greed, loneliness, but I've learned that people who live behind masks are often hiding their own pain. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it helps me remember that truth, even when painful, is a form of mercy. Now, when I look back, I don't see the betrayal anymore. I see a lesson carved out of love, that honesty can cost you something precious, but it gives you peace in return. Love can survive many things, but not deceit. And sometimes, doing what's right means breaking your own heart first. Maybe you've faced something like that, a moment when telling the truth felt like losing everything. I'd like to hear your story. Tell me in the comments below. I read everyone. The sound of silverware was the only thing breaking the silence. It was supposed to be a joyful dinner. My son bringing his fiancée over. The woman he said he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. The lights were warm. The table was perfect. And yet, something felt off. Her laughter didn't reach her eyes. Every time she looked at me, there was a flicker of something colder, polite on the surface, but sharp underneath. I smiled, trying to ignore it, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe I just wasn't ready to share him yet. But then she leaned toward her friend, the one she'd invited last minute, and said something in another language. My son didn't understand, but I did. I had lived abroad once, long before he was born. I knew every word, and every word cut deeper than the last. It wasn't just a careless joke. It was mockery about my dress, my voice, the way I tried too hard to be polite. The kind of cruelty people use when they think they're safe, when they think you're too ignorant to understand. I sat there, still, my hands folded in my lap. My son laughed softly, unaware. The woman he loved smiled sweetly at him while stabbing me in the heart with every syllable. I felt the air leave the room, my appetite vanish. But I said nothing, not one word, because that's what strength looks like sometimes. Silence in the face of humiliation. I watched her, memorizing the way her lips curved as she whispered her little performance. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But inside, something shifted. Something cold, steady, and determined. By the time dessert was served, I already knew this wasn't over. And as I cleared the plates, smiling through the ache in my chest, one thought echoed in my mind, I guess, to understand that night. I have to start at the beginning. It was strange how time seemed to slow in that moment. 1 second, I was sitting there, smiling politely, and the next, every sound around me felt distant. The clinking of forks, the soft hum of conversation, the faint laughter that no longer reached me. My heart didn't race. It sank, heavy and low, like it had realized something my mind didn't want to accept. I understood every cruel word she said, every one of them, and still, I sat there, motionless. I could feel the heat rise to my face, but I kept my expression calm, the same calm I'd practiced for years as a mother, when patience was the only thing that held peace together. My son was right beside her, smiling, unaware of the poison being whispered in front of him. That hurt most of all. Not her insult, but his innocence. I thought about the way I raised him, how I'd taught him that kindness was strength, that respect was love in action. And yet here I was, being mocked by the woman he planned to marry, a woman who saw me as small, as unworthy, as something to laugh about. But anger never came, only quiet. I stared at my glass of water, tracing the condensation down its side, letting the coolness anchor me. I swallowed my humiliation with each careful breath, finishing my meal as if nothing had happened. Because sometimes, love demands silence, not because you're weak, but because you're protecting someone you love from a truth they're not ready to see. When dinner ended, I helped clear the plates, my movement steady, my voice calm. Inside, I was bleeding, but some pains don't need an audience. They carve their lessons in silence.